So I finished New Game Plus Plus in Armor Core 6 Fires of Rubicon and got in all three endings, the Fires of Raven, the Liberator of Rubicon, and the Alla Lacta Est, which I'll be calling the Dias Cast for the remainder of this video. And I went through them, I watched the endings, I rewatched them a couple times on YouTube, I watched some lore videos, and I've just been thinking about it, and I think I could maybe give kind of my opinion as to what's the good ending, what's the bad ending, what's the true ending. How do I kind of evaluate them? How do I rank them? What do I think the kind of the interpretation and consequences of them are? Because when it comes to FromSoft, the endings are always at least somewhat ambiguous. I think largely because you don't know what the long term consequences of your actions are. You're acting often with incomplete information, and frankly, a lot of the quests are broken, particularly in Dark Souls 3, so it can be very easy to not get the ending you were looking for, but I digress. Now, I've been trying to think if there's like a particular way that the endings go, because there's very seldom a good ending and a bad ending. There's often, with the exception of Elden Ring, there's normally, I'd say there's two main ways you could look at it. You could try to map like a Shin Megami Tensei worldview onto it, like where you have a law ending, a neutral ending, and a chaos ending. So, like in the context of Dark Souls 1, linking the flame would be the law ending, walking away and becoming the Dark Lord would be the chaotic ending. Although it can be kind of difficult when you get to something like when I guess in Dark Souls 2 when you have the walk away from the throne of want and trying to find your own path forward. Is that a chaotic ending or is that a neutral ending? So that's one way you can look at it. I think by that metric, the most probably obvious one would be Dark Souls 3, where I'd say Link the Flame is the law ending, the End of Fire is the neutral ending, and the Usurpation of Fire is the chaos ending. The alternative is the core theme, I think, of most FromSoft games is the idea of change. Specifically, the idea of change, be it progress or regression, being opposed by the status quo, or I'll say stasis for the remainder of this video. The idea of keeping things the way they are, of restoring them to the way they were before the current crisis, and almost a kind of inevitable failure of that when fighting against incoming changes. And this is very prevalent in the Dark Souls games, as you always have the fire is almost always about to go out, and there's almost always a choice between linking the fire, trying to keep it going, or letting it end. And there's always the option of supporting the status quo in some way or walking away. So, case in point, first game, stasis ending, link the first flame, change ending, walk away. Game two, stasis ending, link the first flame, take the throne of want. Change ending, walk away and try to find your own solution. In Dark Souls 3, you have two change endings, the Usurpation of Fire and the End of Fire. And then there's the status quo ending. I get that there's a fourth ending, but it's not really that relevant. And when it comes to Elden Ring, it's a little bit harder, but I'd say most of the traditional endings are kind of status quo ones. Like I would say Age of Fracture is a status quo one. I don't know if you want to argue that the Age of Order is a status quo ending. If anything, you're kind of making the government more conservative and more resistant to change. Whereas you have change centric endings such as the Age of Stars or the Frenzied Flame. And once again, it doesn't necessarily mean that change is good and stasis is bad because sometimes it's the inverse. Like for instance, in Demon Souls, I would argue the change ending is siding with the old one and destroying the world, whereas the status quo ending is to send the old one back into slumber and bring the world to how it was before the current fog and the current crisis that it's going through. And that is siding with the status quo, but not blowing up the world seems like a pretty good thing to me. My point is, they tend to be morally ambiguous. There's also the issue, once again, of incomplete knowledge. Like in Dark Souls 1, it's quite possible to not have met Kath and you're just told by everyone else that if you link the first flame, you'll become Gwyn's successor. The Basically everything will be resolved permanently. The undead curse will go away. There'll no longer be sacrifices. You'll become the new God King. But if you talk to Kath, you find out that a lot of this is just a massive lie, and they're just going to use you as a sacrifice to keep the fire burning a little bit longer. Now, when it comes to Armor Core 6, what I find kind of interesting is it's sort of the opposite thematically of most Souls games. In most Souls games, in the Souls games, you have fire and dark, or light and dark. And light tends to represent civilization, progress, culture, technology, art, all those kind of things. It's kind of the Promethean drive towards greater and greater things, whereas the dark represents peace, regression, sleep, restfulness, and kind of a reversion of things to a more primordial form. And the Souls games are about the forces of light, or the forces of kind of progress and civilization, attempting to resist decline, attempting to arrest decline to prevent things from changing. But at least in the perspective of the kind of the light aligned people in these games, prevent things from crashing and burning and the world from dying. Now, it's kind of the opposite in Fires of Rubicon, because you're trying to protect the status quo against the future, against complete and total societal and special change, against the entire universe becoming something fundamentally different than how it was before. And rather than some sort of descent of humanity, what you're struggling against, and what everyone in the game is struggling against, is the transcendence of humanity. Is humanity going through its next stage of evolution, of the world changing forever, versus the world reverting to a previous format. So, that being said, let's talk about the three endings. So, the first ending, and the ending that most people consider to be the bad ending, is the Fires of Raven ending. This is if you side with the Overseers, specifically Handler Walter and Cinder Carla. In this ending, you succeed in burning all of the coral, which destroys all remaining life on Rubicon, and I believe scorches a number of other planets in it and neighboring star systems. And you're known as the man who burned the stars. And a lot of people consider this to be the bad ending because you committed genocide and because the coral was a life form. Now, is it really that simple? If you look at the people who want this ending, you have Walter and Carla and a couple others. And Walter and Carla seem like pretty decent people as far as Armor Core goes. Walter kind of is more bark than bite. He seems to genuinely care about you and grow to respect you over time. He also talks about the power of friendship a lot, and it just generally seems like a pretty solid dude. He actually reminds me a lot of Artorias in that he is someone who's completely devoted to his duty and is willing to make any personal sacrifice necessary to achieve it. He believes that coral is a unknown entity. It's an unknown factor, and unless it's destroyed and contained, it's going to inevitably, irreversibly change all of humanity to something else. That it's unpredictable, it's unsafe, and that it's not the time to throw the die. You don't have the information. We don't know what happens in the El Electa Est ending. It's very ambiguous. And Walter's perspective is humanity is flawed as it is, and there's a lot of problems with the world, but trying to just go in a completely different, insane direction without knowing anything about it is a bad idea. We'll get to the third ending, but the die is cast ending to me is kind of like you get checked in a game of chess and you throw the board over and shoot the other person in the head and then go and eat go raid their refrigerator for snacks. It's like you kind of take a random overreaction to a problem that's not particularly logical. So I think Walter and Carla are not cynical. There is an aspect of revenge to them, to try to get revenge for the fires of Ibis. But I think they genuinely do believe that unless coral is destroyed and contained, it will spread throughout the universe and it will change it inevitably. And you could also argue that who are you, some like random dude who can barely survive because you're so full of drugs and mutagens and cybernetic parts. Who are you to decide the future of humanity? Single-handedly to just unilaterally do it. Who are you to decide that all of humanity has to engage in this forced evolution and you really have no guarantee it's going to work? Thing could have been like a scam and air is manipulating you and the coral's manipulating you. Maybe all mind is actually run by the coral. And the goal was to um, get you to do this as a way of destroying and controlling humanity and ending what makes it unique. So, is The Fires of Raven a bad ending? I don't know. It's a case where it's either the best ending or the worst ending. If Coral is a malicious entity, if the changes that are created by the die is cast ending are not positive, if there's just the perspective that you can't decide for the rest of humanity something so fundamental, then I would say that this is the best ending because this is an ending that finds a solution to the problem. Now, some people think that this doesn't solve the problem and there's still going to be coral left and it's going to regrow. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. It seems to imply that either you destroyed it all or Rubicon's so burned at this point that no one has any interest in trying to restart coral mining again. So was it really just putting things off for a little while, or does it represent a permanent end? I think to evaluate this ending fairly, we have to imagine that it represents a permanent end, and you destroyed coral forever. So it's the quote Father Dorman, or how you pronounce his name. We shall not cast the die. It's basically going the chance of destroying humanity and like blowing the universe up is not worth whatever the potential gains are. So we're not going to throw the die. We're going to burn the coral. So that's the first ending. It can be the good ending or it can be the bad ending, depending on what you think. Next, we have the Liberator of Rubicon ending, where you side with the Rubicon Liberation Front and you succeed in driving out the corporations, the overseers, and the Planetary Closure Authority, and leave the planet of Rubicon in control of the Rubiconians. You succeed in stopping the destruction of the coral without implementing the coral release plan and spreading it across the galaxy. Now, I've seen two perspectives on this plan. One perspective is that this is the good ending, but not the true ending, because it has a lot of aspects of kind of a Hollywood ending. You save the day, Rubicon is free, you live together with the coral, everybody's happy, the corporations go away. The issue a lot of people take with this, though, is they feel it doesn't resolve the underlying problem. Coral is still there, coral convergence can still happen, and maybe the corporations will just come back. Maybe the PCA will just come back. Maybe the Rubiconians will start fighting each other in a civil war. Also, it doesn't resolve Coral one way or another. It doesn't take the transhumanist path of the die is cast and seek to merge with Coral to become this symbiotic new human race. And it doesn't seek to destroy the Coral and end the threat of it that way. Instead, it has a kind of a vague coexistence in which Ayers tells you that somehow you'll find a way to live together. Um, and it's just very open ended. Now, once again, I can say this is probably the good ending, and I get why people think this is the good ending. Because, like I said, you save Rubicon, you kill the bad guys. It's a relatively happy ending. As for the long term, though, it's more questionable. Now, I will say this. I think it's a little unfair to say that this ending is not the good ending because it doesn't permanently resolve anything. In life, you don't normally have permanent solutions to things. You'll have one side who wins net one conflict, but then you'll have a rematch later on, or the side that won will wind up getting destroyed by some other factor or some other power. There are some issues that are called wicked problems, or are just enigmas that can't be solved. There's a lot of things in life that are like that. And there's a lot of things that you just can't really come up with a final solution to as a way of settling things once and for all. And to me, the ending of Liberated Rubicon does leave things open. Coral is still around. The PCA and the corporations might come back, but you succeeded in moving things forward. You've succeeded in building a better world that hopefully you can work with Coral to kind of find a solution that works for both of you on your own terms. It's not going to be Coral forcibly merged with humanity. It'll be some kind of other symbiotic or cooperative relationship. While it does in the end kind of restore the status quo antebellum, it does resolve all of the issues, at least in the short term. And so I would say I do think Liberator of Rubicon is the good ending because basically everything about it, other than the possibility that something didn't get resolved, is good. The thing not getting resolved is not necessarily just represents the dynamic and ever changing nature of life and that history never ends, it just continues on. So I would say the Fires of Raven could be the best ending because you save the universe, or the worst ending because you destroy Coral, which was mankind's hope for salvation. I would say Liberator of Rubicon is a good ending because even if it's not definitive, everything about it is generally speaking good. And this brings us to the die is cast, the final ending, which is called the true ending by a lot of people. Now, is it the true ending? I don't know. It's the secret ending. It's the ending that's presented as being the last one you unlock. So maybe from that perspective, it would be the true ending. But that's not always the case. For instance, most people agree that the true ending of Dark Souls 3 is the end of Fire ending, and that isn't the secret ending. Now, you have to do something specific to get it, but just going and getting the eyes of a Firekeeper is much easier than figuring out the long, convoluted plot to get the usurpation of Fire ending. Now, is this the true ending or not? I don't know. It's also much like the Fires of Raven. This is either the best ending or the worst ending. It can either be the best thing possible to happen to humanity, or the worst thing possible to happen to. That's one of the interesting things about it, and why I say we have to make decisions in these games based on imperfect information. We don't really know what the nature of the Coral is. Air's very nice to us for the most part, although she tries to kill you in a couple of the endings, or rather in one of the endings. But what is it that Coral wants? Does Coral want to dominate the universe? Does it want to make humans its slaves? What is All Mind's agenda? Does that All Mind want to be the basis of a hive mind that all of humanity is tied to? We just don't really have solutions to these or any questions. What is the Coral Convergence? What happens at the end? Why do all the armored cores reactivate? Why does it say battle sequence commence? Now, I will say one thing about the whole battle systems activate. I did not interpret that as the AIs and the Coral were going to war. I thought it was something like in the end of Fire ending, after you link the fire, there's like a long pause, and then the Firekeeper asks if you still hear her, as kind of a way of confirming you're still alive. And I thought that thing in the Die is Cast ending was there to confirm that Raven survived the whole thing and is still ready for more action and to keep moving forward, rather than necessarily representing some sort of galactic genocide. Now, this ending, for those of you who don't know, is Coral gets into space where it becomes a singularity and then explodes, sending Coral to all parts of the galaxy. So it presumably humanity is now permanently bound with it, and it's like I said, either a symbiotic or a full fusion of the two to create something new. I'm not sure if every human will get their own their own Digimon, their own Coral voice to talk to them as they're going through life. But yeah, we don't know what it does. Does it turn them into like you, where they're freaks with deformed bodies who hear voices in their heads? Does it make them into immortal creatures that are healthier and stronger and smarter and more moral than normal human beings? Does it create a hive mind for humanity? Perhaps one that's controlled at least somewhat by All Mind? We don't really know the outcome of this game at all. What this ending does, what it achieves, and where the future is headed. And that's probably why the dice cast is such a good metaphor, not just because the game is called Fires of Rubicon and it's a Caesar reference, but it is, you are taking a chance and there is no going back afterwards. You throw the dice and try to see on what it lands and just have to abide by that. So you're heading into the new era, like I said, with imperfect knowledge, and you can roll the dice on the coral being benevolent, on it making the galaxy a better place. Or you can just not roll the dice and pursue one of the other two endings to prevent coral convergence. The problem is that do you really have that right to make the decision on behalf of all of humanity? But I think that's kind of the bigger moral quandary because once the dice is cast, it can't be taken back. And you're basically, like as with the throw of a dice, you're betting everything on the possibility that this crazy scheme that you have a minimal understanding of is somehow going to change the future. So, as I said, I think that the Liberator of Rubicon ending is probably the good one, although you could also make a case for the Fires of Raven. Because I don't think history ever really stops or starts. It just kind of continues on indefinitely. It has ups and downs, but overall, there's not a specific flow necessarily to it. And I think that acknowledges that that is the case, whereas you have beaten the evil people, you've saved the coral, you've saved the people, the planet. They are in a position now to go forward with their own free will and make a new future for themselves. You've kind of fulfilled your role as Raven, as the mercenary who fights for what he believes in. So that's my opinion on it. I think the ending was really good. The story of this was really good. Like I said, it's kind of the thematic opposite of the other games, of the Souls games, in that it is about attempting to hold back progress rather than attempting to hold back regression. So I hope you enjoyed the review. More fun content to come. God bless.